Okay, hello and welcome everybody. We're here for another AMA live stream. I'm Marcus, game designer. So it's my second time here in front of the camera. Some great memories from last time, so very much a pleasure to be back for all of you guys out there in the community. We have a bit of a theme going on today. So the main idea is going to be talking about different formats and altered, so things like competitive, multiplayer, draft, and so we'll have a chat about those, answer any questions surrounding the format, but we can also have a wider chat about anything game design related. And I believe if Lockie Knox here in the room agrees with me, we have a little surprise for you guys, maybe a little bit later, so please stick around. So hopefully you don't miss what we've got in store for you. Okay, so guys in the chat, do you have any questions, anything you're unsure about, anything about draft, anything about multiplayer? If you don't even know what those things are, I'm perfectly happy to talk a little bit about the formats, how we develop them, and how things have moved ahead. Okay, no questions so far. What's my favorite mode? That's a very easy answer for me. My favorite mode is definitely draft. I've always been a draft man in every TCG I've ever played, and Altered is not an exception. I think draft and Altered has got like quite a few specifics that make it, or that differentiate it from any other formats, any other constructed deck building format. If you haven't had a chance to try yet, I definitely recommend. Just like the fact that you get to play with like cards from different factions, start creating different synergies between like maybe the hero of your faction and cards from other factions you usually wouldn't get access to. That's just like, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities. And like combined with just generally what makes draft interesting, like the basics of the draft format, plus the addition of like mixing up the new factions, figuring out which hero you're going to play, all those things, just, it makes for a really great format in terms of drafting and in terms of the gameplay. The gameplay's been really fun as well for me. Okay, and we do have a question coming in. Will competitive be best of 3 or best of 1? Okay, so that's actually a very interesting question, and I think the best way to reply to that is to kind of run through our thought process in terms of what's going to work and what's not going to work. So the main issue with best of 3 is time. Games in Altered are usually quite long, especially in comparison to other TCGs. For most other TCGs, you can kind of fit in game from like 10 to like 15, 20 minutes max. So best of 3 works. Games like Lorcana, Star Wars, Magic. And for us, that's not really the case. Games in Altered tend to go usually longer. The way like the mana system works, and like basically there's a minimum amount of turns you have to go through to finish a game of Altered. And that tends to mean that the games are going to run longer, and especially the more slower controlling decks, so like Izmir decks, Orders decks, tend to mean that like games can last upwards of 20-25 minutes quite easily. The issue with that is that if everybody's playing Orders and Izmir in tournaments, you're going to quickly end up with loads of draws, and draws aren't fun for anybody involved. They make the tournaments run longer. They mess up people's standings. Obviously, it's better to have a win and to have more points right, than to draw and to only have 1 point each rather than the 3 you usually get for a match win. So the short answer is we're not entirely sure yet, but it seems unlikely that we're going to run with a system that's best of 3 throughout the whole day for the reasons that I've mentioned. However, it doesn't mean best of 3 isn't something that's interesting to us. For higher stakes matches, like smoothing out or reducing variance is something that we're interested in. So there's a possibility for, well, one of the options we've considered is having best of 1 rounds that would then cut to a bracket system where we'd switch to best of 3. None of that is final, don't take my word for it for now, but basically that's to give you an overview of our thoughts at the moment and all the different factors we're trying to take into account. What's the draft format? Sure, great question. Okay. So I'm going to assume that you know the basics of how draft works in trading card games. So the whole system of opening up a pack, choosing 1 card from it and passing it to the player on your left. And then you're going to do that with multiple packs until you've finished up the packs, and then you have to build a deck out of the cards you've selected. So the specifics for draft and altered, well, there's a couple. First of all, you're going to be drafting with 4 boosters rather than 3. So 1 booster to the left, 1 to the right, 1 to the left, and the final 1 to the right. So that means you're going to have a little bit more options in terms of the amount of cards you're going to have access to. So the booster cards contain heroes, and you're going to keep those in the booster pack. So there'll be in each booster you have a token and a hero. The token you can remove when you're doing a draft. It's not useful in any way. However, the hero stays inside the booster, and it's one of the selectable cards when you're drafting. So that means during your draft picks, you're going to be able to select one of the heroes, and that's going to be one of the heroes you're going to be able to play during the games. The way the faction works, the way the factions work in draft are a bit different to constructed. So in constructed, you're going to choose your hero, and you can only play cards belonging to the faction of that hero. That's not the case in draft. In draft, you can choose up to 3 factions to add to your deck. Your hero has to correspond to one of those 3 factions, but that's basically the only restriction you're going to have. So that means you can choose like Sigismar as an Ordis hero, and in that case, you're most likely going to have Ordis cards in your deck, since that's going to be one of the factions, one of your 3 factions. But you can have any 2 other factions to go along with that. So maybe you have Bravos and Izmir to go along with your Ordis base deck. There's no other rules in terms, so you can have as many cards of the same name as you want in your deck. No other restriction in terms of the factions apart from just having the 3 main ones that your deck's going to be composed of. And you have to basically construct a deck that goes up to 29 playable cards and 1 hero. And if you're missing cards to do that, let's say you only manage to get 27 playable cards in the 3 same factions during the draft, then you're going to complete your deck with what we call some mana convergences. They're kind of like a token card, except that they're actually added to your deck. So they have the same card back as any other playing card. And those cards can only be used to be put in your mana face down. So if you happen to resupply into them, for example, they're a dead card. So it's a little bit punishing to have a mana convergence in your deck. You'd rather avoid it. However, if you end up with 1 or 2, usually it's okay. If you draw them, you just put them face down in your mana, and you have a little bit less choice in terms of card selection. But it's not really that big a deal in case it goes wrong. Yeah, I hope that gives you a brief overview of how the draft format's going to work for us. Okay, what format will competitive modes look like? Will we have slide decks? Okay, so we don't have a clear, definitive answer on that. However, based on what I was saying on the game not being based on best of 3, there's most likely not going to be slide decks in altered competitive. We basically feel at the moment there's enough going on with figuring out the game, figuring out how to construct competitive decks without adding the extra pressure, and also the accessibility issues that the additional cards from sideboards can give to players. One of the other things that we're quite interested in is basically the way the mana system works. It already kind of encourages you to play cards that are maybe more less flexible and are tailored to specific matchups. Let's say, for example, once the metagame starts to develop, maybe Muna and anchoring cards is very popular and very powerful. In that case, then you can just straight up add a couple more removal spells to your deck. And if you're in a matchup where removal spells are not as adapted, just put them in your mana, right? The core gameplay kind of allows you to play cards that are, or basically pre-sideboard your deck in certain ways. So we feel like there's less necessity for that. That's not definitive. That's something that we'd be open to discuss, open to change as time goes on, as the metagame starts to take shape. But we're confident that at the moment it's something that's not necessary, at least for the beginning of the game in the first couple of months. What's the multiplayer format like? Okay, great question. So multiplayer, basically we have 2 different versions. There's 2 against 2, so playing in teams of 2 players, and there's free for all. I'm going to mainly talk about 2 against 2 because that's the one that we've had the most work on and that we're the most confident about at the moment. And so the rules for multiplayer 2 against 2 were published during the Kickstarter. I'm not sure how easy that should be to find, but maybe if you go back on the Kickstarter page, you might be able to find in the news articles the information that we shared about that. So to give a quick overview, you're basically playing, so you're allied, well, you're gonna have one ally at the table and two opponents. You'll be sat opposite the person you're playing with, and the map is basically gonna form like a kind of cross at the center of the table. So you'll be basically sharing sections of the map with your opponents, and you won't have any map in common. Or, well, you have like the central tile will be in common with your ally. Apart from that, you won't be interacting with them that much. The reason multiplayer 2 against 2 works so well is that a lot of the cards we designed are able to impact your teammate. So, for example, you have cards that will create tokens or they'll boost characters, and you can, of course, create characters in your own expeditions or boost your own characters, but there's nothing stopping you from helping out your teammates. And the player who's going to win is going to be the first, or the team who wins is the team that has the first player that joins the companion and the hero. And one strategy that can be perfectly valid is to have focus on one player, right? Have one player do the whole, go the whole way, while one player just focuses on helping the other player. Or maybe you're going to go for a more flexible game plan where both players are going to try to progress as the game goes on. There's lots of varieties and lots of strategies that the format creates. Lots of different game plans, and also there's lots of deck building options. Right, let's say you were going to decide, okay, let's try and build 2 decks that are going to be complementary, very much focused on helping each other out. Maybe you go for you'll have 2 Bravos decks, one that's going to have loads of cards that are good at receiving boosts, the cards that have the seasons mechanic, for example. And on the other end, you're going to have a deck full of cards that boost, and you're going to have a game plan based on helping each other out. There's loads of other cards that you haven't seen yet that work particularly well in multiplayer, and that can really create whole new strategies and whole new angles of attack for that. So I'm really excited to see kind of what new things people come up with, what new ideas people develop for the format. Okay, next question. Have you found from playtesting that there is an advantage in beginning as second? Okay, and is there any balance for that? That's a very interesting question. So the quick answer is no, we haven't particularly found that. And in fact, when we have conversations, so with our play team, so the team of high-level TCG players, or even with our more regular playtest team, or even in game design, whenever we have conversations about who goes first, who goes second, who's more advantaged, the answer is very often not clear. And it's usually very much dependent on the matchup. So maybe specific heroes want to go first or want to go second. So heroes like Kojo, who obviously have an advantage of going first, often want to go first because then there's a high chance you'll get access to your ability more often. But even that isn't particularly clear. Those decks are usually quite good at winning the first turn anyway, so maybe winning the second turn is actually more important for you. If you're playing certain landmarks, maybe sometimes it's better to be going first when you're going to play that landmark, but then if the landmark costs 3 or if it costs 4 or costs 5, it's going to land on a different window and it's going to impact the game differently. So yeah, basically the answer is it depends. It depends on so many things. It depends on the matchup. Some decks want to go second specifically, but then maybe the opponent deck wants to go second as well. And who's actually more advantage going second is not clear to us. So no, we're not going to try to balance that in any way, shape or form, because to be honest, we're not convinced it actually creates a clear difference in any way, shape or form. That could change. Obviously, maybe we're wrong about this. Maybe as time goes on and we get more data about games, maybe how games play out, maybe it's stuff means through Board Game Arena or other online platforms, we'll figure out, okay, actually going second is a huge advantage and it's a big difference in win rate. If that happens, sure, maybe we will look into balancing it, but I very much doubt that will be the case. And even then, if it's only a small difference, many other card games have a small difference in win rate between going first, going second. That doesn't dramatically affect the experience of players. Are there rules making sure that displays contain a diverse pool of cards for draft and sealed? Right. Okay, that's an interesting question. I can't go into too much detail as to how we make the boosters and how we make the displays. A lot of that information is confidential, and if we reveal too much, it can lead to, well, things can go badly for us if people figure out too easily how the displays are made. But the answer basically is yes. There's lots of things put in place. Within the boosters in themselves, there's systems where you're guaranteed basically a common of every single faction in each booster. There's systems put in place as well to avoid, so you won't be able to get, like, for example, 3 rares of the same faction in the same booster. So within a booster, there's protection levels. Within a booster box as well, based on how the card sheets are printed and placed in the booster box, in the boosters and in the booster boxes. Basically, expect the same kind of things you'll see for other TCGs. Altered won't be any different, and yeah, you'll get a good mix of different cards, different factions when you're doing draft and sealed. PvE format, like a campaign. Okay, so that's a good question. We don't have anything I can discuss or talk about at the moment. It's something we'd be interested in doing, but obviously it was something we'd have to research, something we have to create from scratch. Altered doesn't really function as a game in PvE, because of the way the game functions. It's very much about interaction, about responding to what your opponent does, the back and forth between the two players. So to create something for PvE, we need a lot of adaptation, and that's not something we're ready to share. We basically don't have anything to share with you at the moment around that. But it's definitely an idea that we talk about quite often. So something we'll be interested in doing in the future, but don't expect anything short term. Can you tell us much how the uniques impact on how to build your deck? Okay, that's interesting. I think what I'd say about that is it very much depends on the players, and from what we've seen, different players have very different approaches on what they're looking for and what they're going to try and do with their uniques. There's a wide variety of uniques, as I'm sure you can imagine. There's lots of different things, and if you're trying to do one specific thing, you could probably track down, give it a certain uniques that have that specific ability and use that specifically for your deck. That's one way of looking at it. You can also, people will probably just play uniques that they've opened in their boosters and that they find cool as well. It very much depends on the profile of player. If you're having a more competitive approach, if you have a more casual approach. Some people just want to play the best card. I want the card with the best stats. Some people are going to try and do some crazy synergy where if my 2 uniques on the table at the same time and I play this third and this fourth card, this whole crazy thing is going to happen. What I'd say is that there'll be something for everybody in the uniques. Maybe not in the first unique you open, it might not be the unique of your dreams immediately, but if you go looking for them, if you open enough packs, you'll find something for you. And yeah, it's very much going to impact your deck building, because you're going to be looking for different uniques, and based on the different kind of uniques you're looking for, the decks you'll build around them will be completely different. And that's something I'm very much excited to see. I don't think we're really going to have optimized versions of a given deck list, because it's very much going to depend on which uniques you're going to have and what role they're going to have in your deck. Sorry, I missed it actually. How many packs is draft? So it's 4 packs instead of the usual 3, which you see for quite a few TCGs. 4 packs. That's basically for various reasons, including having the quantity of cards, having access to cards from enough different factions, also having enough to a wide variety of heroes. We didn't want players to be struggling to reach or struggling to find a hero that they'd want to add to their deck or that would fit the factions they're drafting. So basically adding up to 4 basically means you have the right quantities, everything works, and you won't struggle to get a hero that's going to fit your strategy. Is there a clear meta in the office? A faction slightly stronger than the others in the core set? That's a good question. So in the office, it very much depends on who you're talking to at a given time. Even in the office, there's a wide variety of different player profiles. Some people who take the game very competitively, very seriously, but also lots of people who just kind of have their favorite faction, maybe their favorite hero, and are perfectly happy just playing the same style of decks every time there's deck building sessions. And we see that wide variety of profiles, like people who work for Equinox, in our players, in our playtester base as well. So we're quite confident that's going to be representative of the general public. So that said, in terms of metagame, so the play team, so our highest level of playtesters, who all have competitive backgrounds, they have their opinions on which are the best heroes. Tier lists have been made of the different factions, more specifically of the heroes and the factions in themselves. Some factions have like 1 or 2 standout heroes, but maybe the third hero isn't as strong, while some factions have like a closer range of power within the heroes that they have. Honestly, there's not really a clear winner. I imagine some of you in the chat are talking about Ordis. Ordis is good, but not all the heroes are at the same level of quality. Some of the decks are very hard to play and only do well in the hands of the best players. And there's other factions that are much more straightforward, who've done a lot more winning over the months of playtesting. So honestly, the metagame, I think it's going to be a very, very wide variety of different decks and different factions. Is it planned to have a ban list for competitive? Especially interested for unique cards. Right, so in terms of a ban list, so for non-uniques, we're hoping not to, as I imagine most card game designers will tell you, we're hoping not to have one. We probably will have to have one at some point, especially as time goes on and the card pool extends. It gets harder and harder for us to track different interactions and different strategies. And we might get to a point where like a novel design is restricting us in terms of the designs that we can do further down the line. And that could be a good reason for a card to get banned. So yes, we will be open to having a ban list. I'm quite confident it's not something that's going to be necessary in the short term, at least for the first couple months, right? And for the uniques, well, that's a very good question. The answer is we don't know. Uniques are a brand new concept in so many different ways in terms of how we made them, but also in terms of like no other card game has anything that's really comparable, right? So we don't really know how the community is going to react to playing with uniques, how competitive players are going to react to having uniques. And there's not much point in me giving you an answer right now when the game hasn't been released yet, when the player base hasn't touched the uniques yet. There's no point in me giving you an answer which might be completely wrong because it completely unaligns with the reality of how things are going to play out and how people are going to react to the uniques. What I will say is we're going to, like, that's something we're going to be try to be careful as much as possible. Like, we're going to be following the community, listening to your feedbacks, watching closely like tournament results, but also like the deck lists that people are making. And if there's actions we'll have to take, then we'll discuss them and think about them as the time comes. The thing is, right now we can speculate on them, but there's not really much point. Like, honestly, so much could happen between now and then that we're not going to try and predict specifically what would happen to the uniques and what our solutions would be. So yeah, sorry I can't give you a more defined answer at the moment, but we'll definitely be paying a lot of attention to that, and we'll try to find solutions that work for you and for us if they're needed. Do the beta testers make a large percentage of corrections to the game, or board game arena stats? Right, so board game arena stats aren't going to be taken into account, basically because board game arena comes later in the design process. Basically, 99% of the cards are locked in place once board game arena, once the cards are ready for board game arena. So it's not really a testing tool for us at the moment. That's something that could change in the future maybe, but at least at the time being, board game arena stats don't come into account. And then in terms of so how our playtests or how our testers' feedback affects the cards, well, there's very, very few cards that have remained unchanged throughout the design process. And well, I think sometimes us as game designers will come up with our own initiative of like changing a card. Like, okay, this design isn't working for these reasons, right? But that's probably about 10% of cases, and I'd say 90% of the rest of cases of when we change a card are from playtests. It's the main way of getting feedback from us. Sometimes it's our own playtests, like we're going to run playtests internally, right? But yeah, our playtest teams have a massive impact on what we work on. They give us feedback on how a set is doing. They inform like what we're going to be trying to work on, which cards we need to work on, but also maybe like we'll get feedback such as, okay, like this library hero isn't really working, like the decks we're doing around them isn't functioning, and then we'll be, okay, then we need to rethink the way we're constructing this archetype. Maybe we need to rethink the hero. Maybe there's just a couple supporting cards that need to be modified. But yeah, so their job is essential basically in letting us know where issues are. And then it's our job to understand like fundamentally what the issue is and to understand what kind of solutions would actually function and solve the issue. And sometimes that's not obvious, right? Sometimes someone will be like saying, oh, this card isn't good enough, or this hero isn't good enough. Actually, the reason is like, okay, well, maybe it's actually the supporting cards that need to be modified, not the card in itself. But yeah, definitely the playtest teams have a huge impact in terms of giving us feedback. And they're, if anything, the main thing that drives our work and our modifications to the card files. As someone who struggles with deck building, how should I approach deck building and creating a deck? Okay. Okay, so in Altered, we tried to put quite a lot of effort in making sure people wouldn't be too lost when joining the game, opening their first booster packs, and deciding on what to do and what directions what deck to build, basically. The main starting point, I'd say, is start with a hero, choose one hero and commit to that hero. Your hero is your most central game piece, and you want to create your game plan around the synergies that your hero allow you to do, and you want all your cards in your deck to be supporting that hero and that game plan. So start with a hero, commit to it. If you change halfway through, well, I'd say start again. Like, you can't just take a random deck, change the hero. That's probably not the best way to go at it. So choose your hero, and then you're going to want solid base of characters, right? Characters, you can't go wrong with characters. Characters are always useful. Statistics are always useful because they're what allow you to stop your opponent, but also you to move forward in the expeditions. So start off with a good base of characters. You're going to want a solid quantity of characters that cost 1, 2, and 3. Depending on the strategies, you might want some that go more like 4, 5, 6. But then that depends on the decks, right? Some decks can get away with running like 80% of characters that cost 3 mana or less. And yeah, finish it off with a couple supporting spells, maybe some landmarks. There's other ways, of course, of deck building. Like you can deck build more based on synergies. Maybe you want to start with a landmark and kind of go from there. But the heroes are designed to serve as a starting point for that. So if you start with a hero, figure out, okay, what's the best way of activating my hero ability every turn, making the most of my hero ability every turn. You can't really go too wrong from there. So I hope that gives you some ideas. Would you expand on the environmental atmosphere, like with implementing weather states? Okay, so I'm guessing you're kind of asking that question based on the adventure cards, right, and how the map functions, and like adding other elements to that. So sure, it's a possibility. Although for the time being, what I'd say is the central adventure cards they're altered. Like that is what Altered is about. It's about those adventure cards. And we're not in a particular hurry to modify anything of that. In the same way that you wouldn't modify the amount of starting life you'd have in another TCG, we're not planning on modifying, at least for the short term, anything about how the central map functions. However, yeah, card designs that impact the map, sure, that could happen further down the line. Obviously, nothing just yet, but that's definitely design space that's interesting to us and that we'll be open to exploring. Are you thinking of implementing object cards corresponding to the lore in future game dev? Sure, that's definitely a possibility. I can't really tell you what's in the pipeline and what's not in the pipeline at the moment. But yeah, we're always going to be open to working with Yoshi and the lore team to create coherence between what we're offering as designs and the storytelling that's going on. And if there's cool items, cool objects, anything cool that hasn't really been represented in cards already, yes, that's definitely something we'd like to work to having cards for and implementing in the game at some point. Can't tell you too much about when or how, but we're definitely open to the idea, yeah. How did you come up with 3 as a number of uniques per deck? Gameplay reasons or accessibility? Combination of both of those things. Accessibility is definitely important. We didn't want to go more than 3. Like, once you get to 5, 6, 7, then that can massively increase the prices of decks. We imagine that uniques are probably going to be more expensive, well, the most expensive pieces of decks, right? They're going to be, the best uniques will probably be more expensive than the rares. So that's definitely something we wanted to keep low. The number 3 also fit pretty well in terms of, it's an easy number to remember because you're allowed 3 copies of any other card of the same name. So you're not adding like an extra number that players have to remember when they're learning the deck building rules. And we also thought it was a pretty good compromise between like players having a high chance of actually seeing uniques in their games, but also not drawing too many, right? Uniques are complex cards. They have usually more text than the other cards. As there's a wide variety of uniques, you can't just learn the unique and remember it. You're probably going to have to read the card and figure out what's happening on the fly, especially when your opponent plays one. So yeah, 3 kind of strikes a good balance of, there's a very high likelihood that you'll see at least 1 during the game, sometimes 2, but usually no more than that. Do you see the current 3 format, so the current format of 3 mirrored biomes as eternal going forward, or could you see changes? So that kind of comes back to what I was discussing earlier. That's not something we're planning on changing in the short term. Basically, when we were designing the adventure cards, we tried many iterations of different arrangement, different quantities of cards, different numbers of biomes, different setups. And lots of them didn't work for many reasons because like the biomes weren't balanced, the games were too long, the games were too short. And we're very happy with the formula we have at the moment, and there's a low likelihood that at least in the short term we actually find something that works with the criteria we have and that offers something new and interesting. So short term, that's not something we're planning on changing. Long term, anything can happen. Anything can happen, and there's definitely design space in the adventure cards. So yes, it's definitely something we might explore in the future, but don't expect anything too soon. In 2v2, when are the effects of Kojo and Akesha happening? Yes, okay, so good question. So to basically summarize that for those who might not know the cards, basically in 2v2, there's only 1 first player token which you're going to pass around the 4 players in a table. That means you're only first player once every second turn. The issue with cards like Kojo, Akesha, and actually Lindiwi is also another example, is that they have a specific ability that only happens when you're the first player. And that means they're inherently weaker if you're only first player a fourth of the time rather than half the time in typical 1v1. We haven't actually written any precise rules about that yet. My preferred solution, well, it's kind of, well, we're not entirely sure how we're going to deal with it just yet. As players at the moment, if you're playing in 2v2, my recommendation is go whatever feels right for you. And at release, I'm sure that's some kind of information we have to put in the FAQ of those specific cards. And we'll have a clear-cut decision That's not just my opinion at the time being, but a clear-cut decision from the whole team as how we want them to work in 2v2. So yeah, you'll have the clear answer for that at release. I'd recommend basically just playing them the same way you play them in 1v1. So having it like if your teammate has the first player token, run with that at the moment so that it doesn't particularly change the balancing. But don't take that as an official ruling or an official decision from the game design team. We'll clear that up in the FAQ of the cards at release. How is your day going, Marcus? Great, thank you very much for the question. I've had a fun day working on things I can't tell you about, but I've been doing some design. It's been great, it's been good fun. Yeah, thank you for asking. Ooh, okay, what kind of hurdles do you run into being a game designer? Okay, I'm going to take that as a question as once you are a game designer rather than how to become a game designer. So what kind of hurdles do you run into as a game designer? There are so many. There's so many different ones, right? One of the big things that isn't easy is overcoming your own biases. It's kind of hard to differentiate like you yourself as a designer and you yourself as a player. And you're naturally going to be biased towards coming up with designs that you enjoy as a player. And we're all kind of guilty of that, but it's also very important to do designs that speak to other profiles and people that don't have the same mindset that you do. So yeah, overcoming your biases is a big one, right? And there's all kinds of biases in game design. A big one can be like getting emotionally attached to your own designs. In any kind of creative work, it's normal to like have slight preferences for your own designs. Obviously, that doesn't make the game better, right? What makes the game better is being able to be able to analyze them in a rational way and like choose the best design for the set you're working on, rather than choose your favorite design because it's your little idea that you find cute or that you find fun. So yeah, overcoming biases is a big one. Another one is communication. A big part of our jobs as game designers is basically arguing. Well, maybe not arguing, that's not the right way of putting it, but debating. If everybody in the team agreed on everything, things would be super easy and super quick. However, I imagine that the game wouldn't be very fun. If everybody had the exact same vision, the same way of working, there wouldn't be enough variety, enough interesting things coming from different directions for the game to be good. So a big part of our job is confronting ideas, confronting design philosophies, arguing like, is this design better like this or is it better like that? And in doing that, you need to be good at communicating, right? You need to have limits in terms of like you can't go too far in this kind of conversations. There's also times where like we can be arguing about the same thing for like 15 minutes. Like, okay, this is going in circles. We're not going to agree right now. Let's put it back to later. So yeah, good communication is essential during those processes because we're constantly having these conversations, and if we're not able to have them in a way that's efficient and that like respectful of everybody, things can go south pretty quick. When creating the second set, did you include cards to counter prevalent strategies in set 1? Okay, I'm not sure how much I can get into detail about that, but I guess we're always going to have design philosophies around that, right? You're always going to want to put options to counter strategies. Like for every strategy you're going to create, you want there to be counterplay. So you're going to want to create designs that can answer those strategies. And sometimes you run out of space in a given set, or sometimes the cards that counter that strategy don't fit in the identity or like the structure of the set you're currently making. So sometimes they get pushed back to future sets. So yes, you'll probably see in future sets things that are like solutions or answers to strategies from earlier sets. I don't think I'm revealing much by saying that. I think most card games have that kind of design. Loads of other card games have similar things. So yes, you'll see things like that happen for Altered. Shall we leak a card? Shall we? Yes. I'm absolutely down to leak a card. Okay, here we go. So this is Aloe Vera, a nice little Mooner guy who I'm quite a fan of. So he costs 3 from hand, 3 from reserve. 224 are his stat line, and we have the quite short, not short but snappy, sweet but snappy line of text, at noon, resupply. Okay, so what's going on with this little guy? So I quite like this design. I think he's quite interesting because he basically doesn't do anything by himself. So at noon basically triggers once you've drawn your cards and once you've put your mana down. But you usually wouldn't have him in play at that point. Like you'd play him at the beginning of your afternoon, for example. So the trick with this guy is that you have to find a way to keep him in play. So there's different ways of doing that. Anchored obviously comes to mind, so it's with Mooner, but Asleep can also function. But yeah, the little trick of this guy is to anchor him. You want to anchor him and then reap the rewards of his ability at the beginning of the next day. Another thing that works well in that idea is his mana cost. So it costs 3 from hand, and that's quite important in Mooner because most of the effects that allow you to anchor a character in Mooner are restricted to characters that cost 3 or less. Since it's 3 or less, you're usually going to want to anchor a character that costs 3 because they're the ones with the best stats. So you'll get higher value from anchoring them. So yeah, we kind of thought of him as a design, like a little twist on how to anchor a character. So when you anchor him, you're not just getting the benefit of like the statistics over 2 turns, but you're also getting an additional ability, like an extra reward. In this case, it's commit resupply. There's one last thing which I find pretty cool about him, is that we also specifically thought about him for one of the Mooner heroes, which is Argent and Spike. So Argent and Spike basically very much like it when you have cards in reserve, because then you have more fodder to discard cards to anchor future cards. And so Aloe Vera has the basically perfect sweet spot of simultaneously being a strong 3 mana character which you can anchor with the ability. So then you can get the payoff, which is the resupply, and then the resupply basically gives you more fodder to sacrifice or to discard to anchor further characters in the next turn. So it's simultaneously like a payoff for Argent, but also has a bit of an enabler for the ability. So I very much like that kind of idea. Like when you first read the card, you maybe don't kind of realize all the different levels of the interactions it has. But I definitely like the fact that it plays multiple roles in the same deck, in the same kind of strategy. Okay, yeah, so I hope you guys like it. Why is Lyra the best? I kind of agree with that. You know what? Like, I'm a pretty big Lyra fan. I was definitely not a Lyra fan in the beginnings of Altered when I first joined the company, when I started working on the game. But Lyra grew on me. And Lyra is the best because you have zeros in your statistics, and it makes you think about placing your characters in the right biomes and how like your different statistics interact with you, with your opponent. And that's something I find incredibly fun. Yeah, maybe not so much for the dice rolling aspect. That's slightly less my cup of tea. But I really enjoy like how Lyra's characters interact with our core gameplay. Any plans for game modes we might not think of from other games? So 3 versus 3. Sure. So something else we're working on at the moment for Altered is freefall. So 3 versus 3 doesn't really join into that, but like freefall, which would then potentially tailor for different numbers of players. Although 4 players basically is going to be the most easy in terms of setting up the map and having a map set up that works for everybody. Other things could be possible. I think the downside with 3v3 is that we're starting to get to numbers of players that become more difficult to manage, especially with like the turn-by-turn system of Altered, which can make like a given day be sometimes quite long once every single player has to go by. So I think 4 players or 2v2 is kind of the sweet spot in terms of like there being more things going on at the table without it being like too complex or too long or too boring and having too much time between your turns. But sure, like other game modes could happen. We're definitely going to be exploring those in the future. What is your end goal with Altered? Wow, okay, that's quite a question. What is our end goal with Altered? I'm not sure I have a straightforward answer for you there on that one. I'm not sure I can give you an end goal because there's not, like, it's very hard to give an end goal on a trading card game which we're hoping could last for, 10, 20 years. Like, there's never really an end goal. Well, the idea is to not have an end goal, actually, and for it to continue. We definitely have goals, though. I'm still confident there's lots of things to explore in our core gameplay. There's loads of untouched design space at the moment. So at least our short-term goals are to dig a bit deeper there, learn more things about how the adventure works, how the expeditions work, how the turn-by-turn system work, and all those kind of things. Adding little bits and bobs to like the core gameplay we already have. Are you dedicated to the design of one faction or one game mode? Okay, so that's a great question. So to one faction, no. So some people have their preferred factions in the design team. However, we're always going to be touching to a variety of different things. If we dedicated like certain factions to certain players, to certain designers rather than players, we'd probably end up with factions that feel way too different and don't have enough common ground in the way they work. Obviously, we want the factions to have differences and to like have variety in the gameplay, but they still need to feel like an altered faction. And having different designers, like if anything, stuck to given factions, would probably restrict creativity too much and would create too many differences in the way the factions would feel and would play. In terms of game modes, however, that's a different story, and different people in the team have different affinities for different game modes. So I mentioned earlier that Draft is by far my favorite alternative game mode, and I'm definitely one of the people in the team who's most invested and interested in the Draft formats for Altered. But I'm not that much of a multiplayer fan. And we have other people in the team who've worked a lot more on multiplayer, and they'll be the people who are like, hey guys, like you can change the wording on that card and it makes it way more interesting in multiplayer for this reason, this reason, this reason. Or like, hey, careful with that card, it's a little bit too strong in multiplayer, do you have a way of making it a little bit weaker? So yeah, different people in the team kind of are looking out for different things based on the different formats. Are cards always designed around lore, or does Yoshi ever create lore for a cool mechanic? Yoshi definitely creates lore for a cool mechanic, and the information basically goes both ways. Depends very much on the set, depends very much on the cards and the processes we had in place at that point in time. But no, absolutely, loads of mechanics originate from game design, and then we work together with Yoshi to find a way to make it function, to make it make sense, to make it be evocative in the Altered world. Okay, next question. It's over, okay. But can you tell them the subject of the next AMA? I absolutely cannot. Is that something I should have known? Oh, okay. So the next AMAs are going to be about the unique cards. I'm sure you've got loads and loads of questions about the uniques. I'm very excited for the AMA and for you guys to get to see a little bit underneath the hood. I was lucky enough to work on the uniques for a certain amount of time, and it was a really exciting, interesting process. And I can't wait to share with you guys like how it all works, what everything we kind of had going through our minds, all the little knobs we were tweaking throughout the process, so it's going to be a very exciting one. See you early May for the uniques. Okay. Thank you, Lockie Knox. Thank you guys for watching, for all the questions. It's been a great time. Thank you so much. And yeah, see you very soon in May for the uniques. Can't wait.